Hey friends, it's Jacob. So this is the scene we're going to paint today. It's a pretty basic rural scene. We've got this old shack with these trees growing behind it, and a path in the bottom left of the photo. A nice barbed wire fence, kind of splitting up the different planes of the scene, and then a very simple sky with some puffy clouds in it. And the thing that really caught my eye about this scene is how that roof kind of pops out against the middle value of the trees and the shadow side of the house and those background hills, which are also going to be middle value. So, pretty basic scene. Let's get right into it. Okay, so we're going to start with the first wash, which is going to be the lightest colors in the scene. Painting the colors of the light and preserving any pure white highlights, which are just going to be in the clouds in this case. So I'm mixing up some sky color, just cobalt blue, cerulean blue, throwing in some lavender in there to kind of take the edge off. Helps really tone down overly vibrant blues, I've found. And what I've done is I've wet down both sides of the paper, which helps the paper lie flat. And that way I don't have to tape it down. Nothing wrong with taping it down, I just prefer to do it this way. So starting to drop in that sky, painting around the shapes of those clouds. In watercolor, we need to paint around our highlights and our whites. And you can see that I've actually gone in and sketched out where I want those cloud shapes to be. I was really liking that kind of arcing shape that they made in the photo, so I wanted to preserve that. And I'm taking a clean, damp brush, and I'm softening the edges of these clouds just by gently scrubbing into them. And then I'm lifting up some of that paint around the clouds to give that kind of atmospheric look. And as I drop down towards the horizon, I'm switching to a lighter shade of blue. Skies generally tend to lighten as they move towards the horizon. Painting with a fairly big quill brush, which holds a lot of water and a lot of pigment. That really helps get those smooth transitions in the sky and helps eliminate those streaks that can be such a common issue. Okay, mixing up some greens. Start to drop in that background hill, which acts as kind of a frame for the roof. Now remember, this is just the first wash, so these values are going to be very light compared to what comes after, even though they look very dark right now compared to the white of the paper. Once I start to drop in the middle value in the next wash, you will see how much lighter this current wash will become. Keep in mind that watercolor dries several shades lighter than when you first put it on the paper, so you need to push the value just a little bit more at the start. If not, it could look washed out and faded when it dries. It's a very common problem that people who are new to watercolor have. Dropping in that grass, trying to vary the shades of green that I'm using, constantly dipping back into my palette, adding some more red tones here and there, some more yellow, some more blue, just mixing it up, adding some variety to it. dropping in that bush that grows in front of that house. It's a really nice feature that helps break up the shape of that house. I find that it helps it sit more into the landscape, almost like it's a feature of the landscape itself. Something I'm very interested in is how human structures interface with the natural environment. I'm starting to work in the shadow side of this house, this old house that I'm sure hasn't been lived in for who knows how many years. And I'm letting the paint bleed into itself. That green of the bush is bleeding right into the wall of the house. Everything in the first wash is flowing and blending into itself. Now here I'm starting to work on the roof, and there's all these really interesting different colors going on in the roof. That was another thing that really caught my eye, and I really want to portray that accurately. And you see how that red right there is bleeding down into the wall. I just want to let that happen. It's one of the magical things about watercolor, is how it can blend itself and kind of flow in its own way once it's on the page and do things that you can't really predict or control. No other medium can do that. Okay, and that's the first wash done. So I'm going to let this dry, completely dry, and then we're going to continue with the second wash, which will be for all of the middle value tones. Alright, the paper is completely dry now, and we're ready to start with the second wash, which will be for the middle value tones. And I'm coming in and darkening up that background hill, cutting right across the top of the roof so that it really pops out that highlight. Painting that with kind of a blue-green color to help push that hill farther into the background. And warming up that green as it comes forward. Now I want to connect all of the things that are middle value into one big shape across the entire scene if it's possible. So that background hill will connect to the shadow side of the house, which will connect over to those trees growing on top of the house, which I'm going to start painting now, and then over into those background trees. Again, just constantly varying the shades of green that I'm using to paint these trees. And you'll see that I'm leaving little gaps in the tree so that the sky shows through. You want to leave gaps in your trees. You don't want to paint them as a one big solid mass. It just won't look much like a tree if you do that. And you see how the trees connect right into that background hill over top of the roof. Starting to hint at some of the texture of that grass on the ground. I've got my brush splayed out so it's got some teeth in it. Really helps paint that kind of texture. Painting those background trees now, connecting that right into the shape of that foreground tree. It's all one big shape. And then we're going to connect that into the shadow side of the house. Painting that in a warm gray color, slightly warm gray color. And that red that bled from top of the roof is going to actually show from underneath this wash, giving it a really interesting, vibrant look. Since watercolor is transparent, the layers that we put underneath will show through what we put on top. So you can have these very rich layers of color that are all shining through each other. I'm painting around that bush there in front of the house because I want the edges of the bush to be lit. And as I darken the center of this bush and work outward, I'll leave the very tip of it lit. Adding a little bit of texture to the grass. See how the brush is kind of splayed out, and with these downward strokes I can get some really easy grass texture. Just kind of working it in here and there, creating some depth and dimensionality to the grass so it doesn't look so flat, kind of hinting at the individual blades of grass without painting every single one. I was starting to add some detail to the roof with these shadows that are being cast by the tree. Starting to darken up this tree a little bit, giving it some volume and depth. And towards the edges of the tree, I'm leaving these little jaggedy marks, which hints at the shapes of the leaves. I'm really only doing that at the edge of the tree though, where that detail is going to be most easily seen against the sky. Trying to vary my brush strokes. If you use the exact same brush stroke every time, it's going to look stiff and unnatural. Alright, adding some detail to this roof, some of those little streaks of rust we got. Just using some burnt sienna for that. It's got a nice rusty color. Just kind of a plum color going on in this panel of the roof that I really wanted to portray. I like how the different panels have slightly different colors. It gives you kind of this patchwork effect. Adding some more detail here and there with that same plum color. Just little streaks. Clearing off some space on my palette. Mixing up a nice dark gray color, so we're going to drop in some of these branches in the tree. Just show them poking out from the canopy here and there. Dropping in some of those posts for that barbed wire fence. It really creates a nice sense of movement in the scene. How those posts recede into the distance and curve around following the shape of the road. Now using my fingernail to scratch out some lighter branches. Just the edge of my fingernail, and I can kind of change the angle of my finger to show the branches moving in different directions. start adding in that doorway and those windows with a darker shade of gray. The same gray I was using to paint the branches and the fence posts. Now the walls of this building are big stones, and I'm going to come back in a minute and add that detail, that little bit of texture. Just darken up the base of that bush a little bit to make it a little more three-dimensional. Adding in some more branches and trunks. Trying not to get too carried away with it. Just enough to get the point across. These really small details can either sell the painting or they can make it too busy, and it's a very fine line between those two things, and it takes a lot of practice to know when enough is enough and when to stop adding those details. Just darkening up the canopy here and there a little bit with the side of that brush to add a little bit of texture. Also helping further differentiate that tree from the trees in the background, bringing it forward a little bit more. Alright, now adding the details of those stone walls with a slightly darker warm gray, and I'm kind of leaving these little block shapes, painting around these little block shapes, just hinting at that texture. I really like the contrast in texture between that corrugated metal roof and the stone walls of the structure. Just darkening up a few things here and there. A few of those branches, a few of these fence posts. And very carefully add in that barbed wire. Dropping in a few birds to wrap this painting up. Scratching in just a few more branches with my fingernail. Adding just a little bit of texture to that dirt road. And there we have our finished painting. So I really hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you on the next one.